Hi everyone. Today we'll be exploring how gamification is being used in employee selection, where it succeeds, where challenges still exist, and how it connects to the key selection competencies we've been learning throughout our course. Before we dive in, here's an overview of what we'll cover today. We'll begin by defining gamification and exploring the different types that are used in the selection process. Then we'll discuss why organizations are increasingly turning to gamification and how motivation theory provides a strong psychological foundation for designing these assessments effectively. From there, we'll transition into industry applications and examples, examining real-world tools currently used by companies. We'll also look at the data captured through gamified assessments, comparing it to what traditional methods provide. Then, we'll critically evaluate validity and measurement concerns, including construct, content, criterion-related, and face validity, before addressing the general challenges and risks gamified hiring introduces. We'll dedicate a section specifically to equity, bias, and DEI considerations, as these are crucial to ethical selection practice. We'll also review how different stakeholders, from candidates to recruiters, perceive gamified assessments. Towards the end, we'll identify areas where future research is needed and offer practical implementation takeaways for organizations considering these tools. Finally, we'll conclude with a summary of key insights and critical reflections on where gamification fits into the future of employee selection. Our goal today is not only to explain what gamification is, but to engage critically with its promises, its limitations, and its role in advancing or potentially hindering fair, effective selection practices.
What is gamification? Gamification, in the context of employee selection, refers to the deliberate integration of game design principles such as point systems, real-time feedback, adaptive difficulty, and immersive storytelling into hiring assessments. The primary objective is to create a more engaging, psychologically compelling experience for candidates while simultaneously improving the accuracy of measurements and offering realistic job simulations. However, this innovation introduces challenges related to construct validity, fairness across diverse populations, and ethical concerns surrounding data privacy. Throughout this presentation, we will explore both the opportunities and the vulnerabilities inherent in gamified assessments.
Gamification in hiring exists on a spectrum of integration. So, gamified assessments are traditional assessments enhanced with game elements like storylines, visuals, or rewards. The underlying test remains traditional and could still function without the gamified layer. For example, a situational judgment test embedded with animations and immediate feedback. And next, gamefully designed assessments are assessments where gameplay is inseparable from the evaluation. So decisions, strategies, and story progression directly measure KSAOs. For example, Owiwi is a fantasy world situational judgment test where navigating storylines reveals competencies like resilience and adaptability. And lastly, game-based assessments are fully fledged games that infer candidate traits based on in-game behavior rather than direct questions. So one example is Nawayam, which maps personality profiles from player strategies and reaction times. So as integration into these assessments deepens, ensuring that content validity or that tasks mirror real job demands becomes even more critical.
Why gamification in selection? Organizations pursue gamified assessments to address multiple strategic goals. They seek tools that not only predict job performance, but also improve the candidate experience. Gamification offers several benefits. First, gamification enhances candidate engagement, increasing effort and persistence. Second, well-designed simulations provide candidates with realistic job previews of job demands, potentially improving job fit and retention. Third, gamification strengthens employer branding, signaling innovation and candidate-centric values. Fourth, compared to traditional resumes and interviews, gamified tasks often yield richer behavioral data, including micro-decision patterns and response latencies. However, these benefits are contingent upon careful alignment with psychological principles of motivation and rigorous assessment design. Motivation theory and gamified hiring. To understand why gamification might improve candidate experience, we turn to motivational frameworks. Self-determination theory posits that intrinsic motivation is maximized when individuals experience autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Goal-setting theory emphasizes that specific challenges yet attainable goals enhance effort and persistence. Flow theory suggests that deep task absorption occurs when skill levels and task difficulty are optimally matched. Finally, expectancy value theory argues that motivation is highest when individuals believe they can succeed and perceive the task as valuable. Gamified assessments that strategically satisfy these motivational conditions are more likely to elicit authentic, sustained candidate effort. Motivation theories applied to gamified hiring. A key to effective gamified assessment design is ensuring theoretical alignment with established models of motivation. Self-determination theory emphasizes satisfying candidates' needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. In practice, this can be achieved by offering flexible problem-solving approaches, providing progressive difficulty with clear feedback, and embedding narratives that link candidates to an organizational mission. Goal-setting theory reminds us that performance improves when goals are specific, challenging, and attainable. Gamified assessments operationalize this through clear objectives at each stage of the task, for instance, by presenting explicit performance milestones. Flow theory points to the importance of matching task difficulty to the individual skill level. Adaptive difficulty or progressively harder tasks as performance improves sustains candidates' engagement without overwhelming or boring them. Finally, expectancy value theory stresses that candidates must believe that success is attainable and that the task is meaningful. In gamified hiring, this is reinforced by framing challenges as authentic simulations of job-relevant scenarios, thus strengthening both motivation and perceived fairness. By explicitly linking gamification elements to these motivational frameworks, we can design assessments that foster authentic engagement rather than superficial playing to win. Goal setting and expectancy value are particularly relevant for enhancing face validity. Candidates must see the assessment as job relevant and achievable.
Next, onto industry applications and examples. There are several platforms exemplifying the varying approaches to gamified hiring. Harvard, formerly known as Pymetrics, uses mini games to assess traits like risk-taking and cognitive flexibility. HireVue integrates AI-based video analytics with gamified cognitive tasks, focusing on decision-making and emotional intelligence. Codility specializes in progressively difficult coding challenges, supporting competence and flow by progressively challenging candidates. Spark Hire adds lighter gamification features such as timed responses to interviews. However, these platforms differ considerably in how tightly their gamified elements are aligned to real-world job competencies, which is a point that becomes critical when evaluating validity. Traditional selection methods like resumes, structured interviews, and personality questionnaires typically produce static, limited snapshots of candidate qualifications. These tools rely heavily on self-reporting and are vulnerable to impression management and may not reflect how individuals behave under dynamic conditions. Gamified assessments, by contrast, generate thousands of micro-level behavioral data points. Every click, every timing decision, and every strategy shift is captured and can be analyzed. This enables a much finer-grained understanding of cognitive processes, decision-making styles, and behavioral tendencies, providing a richer data set for predicting job-relevant behaviors. However, this depth of data raises new concerns about data privacy, consent, and the ethical issue of candidate information, issues we'll discuss later.
In IO psychology, validity remains the cornerstone of effective selection practices. An assessment is only useful if it measures what it intends to measure, reflects job-relevant tasks, predicts future performance, and is perceived as fair and legitimate by candidates. Gamification, while promising, introduces both opportunities for enhancing validity and significant new threats. In the next 4 slides, we will critically examine construct validity, content validity, criterion-related validity, and face validity, analyzing how gamified assessments perform under scrutiny. Construct validity refers to whether an assessment truly measures the psychological construct it aims to measure. Research to date provides cautious optimism. Gamified Big Five personality assessments have demonstrated moderate convergence with traditional inventories, although certain traits such as conscientiousness align more strongly than others. In a Hexaco-based virtual world assessment, it was shown to preserve the honesty-humility domain without unintentionally capturing other aspects, indicating that the gamified format can maintain theoretical clarity. Cognitive ability assessments offer similarly positive findings. Adaptations of traditional tests such as the Wisconsin card sorting test into gamified formats have preserved core executive functioning measurements correlating strongly with conventional cognitive scores. Behaviorally, gamified situational judgment tests have shown strong convergent and discriminant validity for soft skills like adaptability and decision making, provided that the scenarios and scoring systems are carefully aligned with the target construct. However, the risk remains. Poorly designed games can introduce construct irrelevant variants, for instance, where success depends more on familiarity with the video game controls than on the intended competencies. Thus, rigorous construct validation remains essential in gamified assessment development. Content validity evaluates whether an assessment's tasks represent the critical activities and competencies of the target job. There have already been success stories of companies implementing gamified SJTs or simulations that truly capture the nature of the job that will be performed after selection. However, abstract or highly fantastical games risk weakening content validity. For example, games centered on balloon popping or navigating unrelated fantasy worlds may engage candidates, but if the tasks do not mirror real-world competencies, they may be introducing irrelevant skills and experience into the evaluation process. Thus, strong content validity demands that every core gameplay mechanic reflects an actual job requirement, preserving the link between in-game behavior and workplace performance expectations. Criterion-related validity addresses whether performance on an assessment predicts meaningful outcomes. In gamified assessments, early studies indicate promising relationships. For example, score on gamified situational judgment tests have been shown to predict self-reported work and academic outcomes, suggesting that at least some behaviors elicited by the games map onto real-world success factors. Additionally, gamified Big Five personality assessments have explained variance in critical workplace behaviors such as task performance and organizational citizenship behaviors. However, limitations remain. Much of the existing research relies on self-reported outcomes rather than objective performance metrics. Furthermore, predictive accuracy may vary substantially by industry, role, and assignment design. Organizations seeking to adopt gamified tools must rigorously validate predictive relationships in their specific context before widespread implementation. Face validity refers to candidates' perceptions of whether an assessment appears fair, legitimate, and relevant to the job. Although not technically a psychometric property, face validity critically impacts candidate engagement, motivation, and the employer brand perception. Research consistently shows that candidates view gamified assessments more favorably than traditional ones when the tasks clearly connect to job-relevant challenges. Candidates report higher enjoyment, lower testing-related anxiety, and greater satisfaction when assessments mirror realistic scenarios. However, if the gamified task appears trivial, fantastical, or disconnected from the job, for example, abstract balloon popping games for executive roles, candidates may view the process as lacking professionalism, undermining both trust and brand image. Thus, clear communication about how game performance maps onto job skills, combined with realistic task design, is critical for maintaining strong face validity and reinforcing positive candidate impressions.
Challenges and risks of gamified hiring. Despite their appeal, gamified hiring systems introduce serious risks that organizations must manage. First, the use of AI to score or adapt assessments often lacks transparency. Candidates and even hiring teams may not fully understand how decisions are made, creating concerns about fairness and legal defensibility. Second, if gamified assessments or the AI analyzing them are trained on biased historical data, they can unintentionally amplify existing disparities, disadvantaging underrepresented groups. Third, poorly designed games may motivate candidates to optimize for winning the game rather than genuinely demonstrating job-relevant traits, a motivational mismatch that threatens validity. Finally, gamified systems capture thousands of behavioral microdecisions, raising major concerns about informed consent, data security, and ethical use of candidate information. Organizations must proactively address these challenges to responsibly implement gamified hiring tools.
Gamification in hiring holds genuine potential to improve diversity and equity outcomes, but realizing that potential depends heavily on design and implementation. When gamified assessments are carefully aligned with job-relevant tasks, they tend to enhance candidates' perceptions of fairness and procedural justice. They can reduce bias by focusing on behaviors, not resumes. Research consistently shows that gamified tests, when realistic and purposeful, lead to higher candidate satisfaction, greater completion rates, and stronger employer brand impressions. However, several equity challenges remain. Age-related differences in response to gamified assessments do exist, but the effect is subtle. Studies find that older candidates and those high in certain personality traits such as traditionalism often report slightly lower comfort and acceptance of gamified assessments compared to younger candidates. Importantly, this is not a matter of older candidates being bad at games, but rather about perceptions of relevance, seriousness, and appropriateness of the format for professional evaluation. Neurodiversity presents another critical concern. Candidates with ADHD, autism, or sensory sensitivities may be disadvantaged by fast-paced or overstimulating environments typical of some gamified designs. Cultural fit also matters. Highly competitive or individualistic game structures may disadvantage candidates from collectivist or cooperative cultural backgrounds. The key design principles that support equity and gamification include creating assessments grounded in actual job competencies, transparently communicating the purpose and relevance of each task, and ensuring user-friendly, accessible gameplay. Organizations must pilot gamified assessments across diverse candidate pools to detect and address adverse impact early. While gamification can support DEI goals, success is far from automatic. It requires careful scientific and ethical stewardship throughout the assessment design and implementation process. Stakeholder perceptions can significantly influence the success or failure of gamified hiring initiatives. Recruiters and HR managers who are familiar with gaming concepts tend to view gamified assessments more positively, appreciating their engagement potential and efficiency. However, others remain skeptical, citing concerns about scientific rigor, professionalism, and fairness. Among candidates, reactions are generally positive when gamified assessments clearly reflect real job demands and are presented transparently. However, when games appear disconnected from the actual work or seem trivial, candidate trust can quickly erode. This highlights the importance of stakeholder education and carefully managing expectations across all groups involved in the hiring process.
Future research should focus on several critical areas. First, more longitudinal validation studies are needed to connect gamified assessment scores to objective job performance over time. Second, best practices must be developed to ensure gamified assessments accurately capture the desired construct and predict job performance, all while enhancing candidate experience. Third, self-selection bias in the gamified context must be studied. For example, if certain candidates opt out of gamified assessments, this could skew talent pools and end up missing out on high-performing candidates. Finally, transparency standards must be established to ensure that deeply gamified assessment batteries are explainable, fair, and legally defensible, especially if they are incorporating AI to facilitate the immediate feedback and adaptive difficulty functionalities that we previously discussed.
Practical implementation takeaways. For organizations considering gamified hiring tools, several best practices are critical. 1. Pilot studies should be conducted accompanied by robust validation analyses linking game performance to job-relevant outcomes. 2. Game mechanics must align tightly with actual job competencies to maintain both content validity and candidate trust. 3. Assessment designs should support intrinsic motivation, satisfying autonomy, competence, and relatedness needs. 4. Transparency about data collection, scoring mechanisms, and job relevance is vital to maintain candidate engagement and trust. And finally, organizations must monitor fairness outcomes across demographic groups to ensure that gamified tools do not unintentionally disadvantage any segment of the talent pool.
Gamification represents an exciting frontier in employee selection with the potential to dramatically improve candidate engagement, fluidly simulate real-world job challenges, and provide even more rich behavioral data. However, these benefits are not automatic. Success depends on rigorous validation of construct, content, criterion-related, and face validity, on thoughtful inclusive design, and on strong ethical commitment to transparency, fairness, and data security. When implemented carefully, gamified assessments can humanize hiring processes, creating assessments that are both engaging for candidates and scientifically robust for organizations. Thank you.